In this video, we're going to cover not just Olympic shooting, but also disciplines that are related to Olympic shooting, like the American sport of Bullseye, for example. There aren't a whole lot of people on this platform that have shot or even seen an actual Olympic shooting event conducted, or even a Bullseye match for that matter, but it seems there are a lot of people here on YouTube that have some deeply embedded myths and misconceptions about these disciplines. So the first myth, and one of the most common myths I hear about Olympic shooting, is that Olympic shooting doesn't use real guns. So this myth originates from the fact that there are two events at the Olympics that utilize air guns, namely 10-meter air pistol and 10-meter air rifle. There are a number of reasons why these events exist, and I covered this in a previous video if you'd like to check that out. The fact of the matter is that while I consider air guns to be real guns by nature of expelling a projectile out of a barrel, there exists a portion of the population, especially here in the United States, that do not consider air guns to be real guns, simply because they aren't firearms in the sense that they don't use some kind of combustible propellant charge like the most commonly available cartridge-based firearms out there. Even if we accept this narrow view of what a gun is, this myth falls flat on its face because there are several events at the Olympics that also use firearms. On the pistol side, we have the sports of 25-meter sport pistol and 25-meter rapid-fire pistol that utilize most commonly an auto-loading 22 long rifle pistol like this Pardini SP. On the rifle side, you have three-position rifle, which uses a single-shot 22 long rifle. And if we extend this out to the shotgun sports, those use 12-gauge shotguns. So that means the majority of pistol sports and equal number of rifle sports and both shotgun sports use firearms. Fun fact to consider about this Pardini SP is this pistol is actually considered an assault weapon in multiple US states for the simple fact that it's a semi-auto and the magazine is located in front of the trigger guard, which are some of the tests that multiple states' assault weapons laws use to determine whether or not something is considered an assault weapon. So not only do the Olympics use actual firearms for the majority of events, in the majority of pistol events, they're actually using weapons that states like New York and New Jersey would consider to be spooky, scary assault weapons. I think this myth becomes even more absurd if you look at non-Olympic events and previous Olympic events in the greater sphere of Olympic-style shooting. On the rifle side, you have events like 300-meter rifle, which of course necessitates the use of a larger caliber than 22 long rifle to achieve competitive accuracy at that distance. Typically calibers like 308 or 6.5 Swede were common. On the pistol side, you have the former Olympic sport of 50-meter pistol, which uses a single-shot 22 long rifle like this Hammerly 100. And you also have 25-meter centerfire pistol, which, as its name would imply, necessitates the use of a centerfire caliber like 38 Special or 9mm. 25-meter centerfire pistol is actually incredibly interesting from an equipment standpoint, because a gun like this Smith & Wesson K38 is still competitive, and I've actually won a national level 25-meter centerfire event with this exact pistol that's over 70 years old. I think as late as 2012 or 2014 even, the 25-meter centerfire world record was actually held with a revolver. I personally can't think of any other sport out there today where a gun like this K38 could still be a viable and competitive option on the world stage. And I don't think guns get any realer than an old piece of American iron like this one. And of course, one step removed from the non-Olympic events, you have sports like American Bullseye, and various nations have their own service pistol style competitions that involve traditional target shooting. These are usually done with firearms, and typically fairly powerful firearms, typically service pistols, right? Here in the US, the .45 auto cartridge and the 1911 is by far the most popular centerfire cartridge and gun when it comes to Bullseye and traditional target shooting. So I think this myth is totally absurd. And if you ever hear someone say that Olympic shooting or Olympic style shooting or Bullseye style shooting doesn't use real guns, you can pretty much dismiss that person's opinion on the subject because they obviously don't know what they're talking about. Another myth or maybe complaint that I hear about Olympic style shooting is that people seem to think it's a very inaccessible sport, or a variation of this would be that they think it's a sport that you have to be super rich to get into in the first place. Now, I will say there is definitely more truth to this when it comes to the rifle side of things, but as a pistol shooter, I'm mainly going to speak from my experience in those disciplines. There's also some truth to the cost aspect on the very high end when it comes down to being good enough to have to travel to world championships and world cups and that sort of thing. But at a very base level, there's really no more accessible sport than Olympic style shooting. From a gear aspect, the pistol sports are not gear intense. Everything I need to shoot an international match basically fits in the case with my pistol. And if there's anything people like Yusuf Dikec prove, it's that you basically just need to bring yourself, your gun, and your ammo to win a match. The other thing is range facilities are super easy to find. Basically any square range that can support this style of shooting on a single lane, with the exception of 25-meter rapid fire pistol, which requires you to shoot on 5 separate targets. Even in sports like 50-meter pistol, you may not be able to find a pistol range that goes out to 50 meters, but you can definitely practice on reduced size targets at 25 yards or 25 meters, for example. At that point, you basically just need to get some targets. Any of the large target suppliers should have a plethora of American Bullseye and international targets available. Now, when it comes to the guns and ammo themselves, a lot of people assume that you need some kind of super expensive gun to be competitive, and that really hasn't been my experience. If you're just getting into the sport, any of a number of commonly available fixed barrel 22 long rifle pistols out there, like a Ruger Mark IV, are going to be just as accurate as that Pardini SP. Of course, 22 long rifle is the most inexpensive ammo that you can find on the market, and even something as cheap as CCI standard velocity can provide insanely good match grade accuracy, especially within 25 meters. On the air pistol side of things, the top end air pistols run like $2,000 new, with plenty of budget models under $1,000, and the cost to run an air gun is even less expensive than a 22 long rifle, especially if you consider range facilities. An air gun pellet is a lot easier to contain than even a 22 long rifle, plus you don't have all the flash and noise and gun smoke to contend with, so you may be able to practice in your backyard, your basement, your garage, or even in a hallway in your house. With some ranges charging like $20 an hour for range time, being able to shoot your air pistol pretty much anywhere can present an enormous amount of savings and an enormous amount of training potential. My advice as far as equipment goes would be to just pick up something like a Ruger Mark IV or Browning Buckmark and start practicing and start competing. And that brings me to the other half of this criticism, and that is finding matches. So in Europe and other countries, it's actually not that difficult to find matches. Most clubs will probably have some affordance for the 10-meter air pistol or 25-meter pistol events. Here in the US, it's actually quite difficult to find air pistol and other international shooting events depending on where you're located. You can go to the USA Shooting website and find officially sanctioned matches under the events section. This won't list unsanctioned matches, of course, or NRA sanctioned matches. If you're in the US, you're going to find it much easier to find an American Bullseye match than an international event. The skill set is almost exactly the same, although the format is slightly different. Traditionally, American Bullseye is shot with a 22, a 38, and a 45, but you do have the option to shoot the entire course of fire with a 22 long rifle. The biggest benefit that this presents itself is that it's an excellent opportunity to network with other competitors and find out information on other local matches and international shooting matches and events that may be going on locally that aren't sanctioned through USA Shooting, for example. You can find Bullseye matches as well as air pistol matches primarily through the CMP competition tracker, but I've also gone ahead and put together a map with the help of the Bullseye community to make it easier to find matches. If you're interested in this sport and want to compete, I strongly recommend going to a match on this map or the competition tracker, asking for help, and even if you need to borrow a pistol, someone would probably be more than happy to help you with that. If for some reason there are no matches anywhere near you, again, these sports are super easy to set up, and if you're so inclined, you can easily start your own match, even if it isn't official, right? You basically just need to have the targets and to know some of the rules. The CMP has rule books available for Bullseye and air pistol, and the NRA also has rule books available for all of the international events. Another important aspect I think that shouldn't be neglected is, of course, the accessibility of these sports to para-athletes. For a pistol especially, the only thing you need is a single firing hand. You don't need to be able to run or walk or stand or lift a certain amount or have a great deal of dexterity to be able to manage reloading at speed or anything like that. Most of these events are shot on square ranges, sometimes indoors, but usually on some kind of improved ground, which can be a big deal as far as wheelchair accessibility goes, for example. I think it's impressive that there's even a rifle shooting sport called vision impaired shooting, which is actually a shooting sport for the blind. And the rifles are set up with some kind of feedback system to play a tone in the shooter's ear that changes frequency as the muzzle is pointed closer to the center of the target. So then the sport comes down to the shooter's ability to build their position and pull the trigger without disturbing the gun. So I would say Olympic style shooting sports, especially pistol, are definitely some of the easiest sports to get into, and you basically just have to be good at shooting to excel at one of these sports. So myth number 3 is one that I hear a lot here, especially on YouTube. Again, we're talking about people that largely don't shoot bullseye or have ever shot bullseye. Myth number 3 is that this style of shooting is not useful outside of Olympic style or bullseye competitions, or a variation of this is that Olympic shooting techniques or bullseye shooting techniques don't apply to the real world. So when people say this, it usually comes from a combination of not understanding what Olympic shooting actually boils down to and not actually knowing anything about what bullseye or Olympic shooting techniques actually are. One of the things I enjoy doing on YouTube is watching videos of people giving shooting advice. And in a not insignificant number of videos, people talk about bad shooting techniques and then frame them as bullseye shooting techniques. Again, this is coming from people, the vast majority of which have never shot or even seen an actual bullseye competition, let alone actually listened to what a high-level competitor has to say. A perfect example of this that I hear pretty often is a technique called riding the reset. This is a technique, a bad technique, where you fire your shot, bang, the gun cycles, and you consciously let out the trigger right up to the point where it resets, and then you pull the trigger again once it resets. For some reason, a lot of people seem to attribute this technique to bullseye shooting or claim it originates from bullseye. This is something I have never heard a good bullseye shooter talk about or teach in the current day, or going back well over 70 years and reading through old articles and literature on bullseye or Olympic style shooting. If you ever try this technique in a bullseye match, which is majority rapid fire or in 25-meter Olympic rapid fire, you will not achieve a great deal of success with this technique. You are taking time away from the trigger and wasting it on the reset, which has absolutely no bearing on where that bullet is going to go. So it's bad techniques like this that somehow get attributed to bullseye shooting or Olympic style shooting. And since there are so few people that can actually represent bullseye or Olympic shooting on social media, this narrative goes unchallenged. And people then come to this conclusion that bullseye teaches you bad techniques and that it's outdated. These techniques are not applicable to other types of shooting and so on. So what exactly does bullseye shooting or Olympic style shooting actually teach us? Bullseye or Olympic style shooting simply promotes the fundamentals of marksmanship: sight alignment, trigger control, sight picture, grip, stance, breathing, and follow through. Now, a lot of people who lack imagination get hung up on the specific gear that people are using in competition, whether it's the guns or the blinders or the apertures, or the fact that the targets are not some kind of anatomical or human silhouette target. But at the end of the day, Olympic shooting is a measure of your ability to shoot fundamentally. Your ability to put a bullet exactly where you want it on a target in the most consistent and repeatable manner. At some point, no matter what type of shooting you do, you're going to have to line up the sights and pull the trigger, or at the very least, pull the trigger without sending an errant shot away from the target. For me personally, bullseye shooting has enabled me to absolutely crush GSSF or Glock Sports Shooting Foundation matches, for example, with no experience shooting them beforehand. My very first GSSF match, I shot a perfect score, and I remember the match director being like, "Oh, you must have done this before." And I was like, "No, this is my first match." My very first two-gun match that I attended, I attribute my success in that match largely to my ability to shoot a pistol bullseye style. In fact, I shot half that match one-handed pretty much. Even as a rifle shooter, I'll have friends like hand me their rifle and I'll put down a better group than they can with their own rifle despite having never shot their rifle before. In fact, the reason why I'm not a bigger rifle shooter to begin with is I'm not really interested in spending all the time it takes to get data on my ammo and the different ranges and weather conditions, etc. That stuff's just not as interesting to me as actually just being good at shooting. And that's exactly what bullseye or Olympic style shooting has taught me, and what it can teach anyone if people would stop pretending that it's some totally alien or different form of shooting. Like, there's a reason why I can consistently put down, you know, sub 4-inch groups at 50 yards with a pistol one-handed. And I'm probably the only person on YouTube that can say that. And I have plenty of targets to prove it. So when people talk about not being applicable to other types of shooting, I kind of laugh at it. But what about real life applications? Well, we're talking about pistol fundamentals. So what are the real life applications of pistol fundamentals? Well, I would define a real life usage of a firearm as the offensive or defensive application against a human or animal target. Basically any instance where a bullet hits the intended target, which is flesh. Another component of this criticism of bullseye or Olympic style shooting is that a lot of people seem to be tunnel visioned on the idea of defensive gun usage against a human aggressor, and they have a very narrow idea of what that might possibly entail, such that they fail to consider the myriad of situations where you may have to use a pistol, like dispatching pests such as squirrels or raccoons, or hunting deer or hunting pigs, or in the case of the Greenwood Park Mall shooting, using essentially offensive handgun skills at 40 yards to eliminate an active threat in the defense of other people. The other aspect of this is that outside of match pressure and the fact that you're shooting completely unsupported with one hand, Bullseye in many ways represents an ideal shooting condition or sort of a baseline, especially during slow fire or precision events. You have a lot of time to really think about and execute a perfect shot, and this represents your ability to shoot under near ideal circumstances. And that's important because if I'm starting with a group like this under ideal circumstances or bullseye match conditions at 50 yards, if I induce a stress component or time component like, I don't know, buck fever when your heart rate gets kind of elevated as you line up the sights on a real nice deer, well, maybe my group, which really represents your first shot probability, that's really the whole point of shooting a group, my group might open up a little bit, but not so much to where I wouldn't guarantee myself a kill on the deer. Most people at 50 yards with a handgun unsupported are starting with a group like this, and then you induce some stress and that group, extends beyond the frame of this video. And like I mentioned earlier, in Olympic style or bullseye events, you're shooting with one hand. So in most other circumstances outside of a match or practice for a match, you can use two hands. And I think it goes without saying that two-handed shooting is an advantage over one-handed shooting. So if my rapid fire groups at 25 yards with a 45 starts out like this under bullseye conditions, well, in a real life self-defense scenario, right, the distance will probably be a lot shorter than 25 yards. So now my group is going to get smaller. And I'm probably going to use two hands if I can help it. So my group gets even smaller again. Or maybe I can maintain the same group size at a faster pace. Or maybe I pick up the pace to the point where the group starts opening up. And then maybe the group opens up a little bit from the stress induced by that type of situation. But if I'm doing this under bullseye match conditions at 25 yards, one-handed with my 45, my group at 7 yards is probably not going to open up so much so that I wouldn't be able to deliver an immediately incapacitating shot to the heart or central nervous system. Also consider that every match you shoot is basically a test of shooting under stress and understanding how your body reacts to that stress and how that might affect your marksmanship ability. Again, the problem is many people are starting from a group that looks like this at 7 yards with two hands on the gun. You then add a little bit of stress or a time component and they are no longer making immediately incapacitating hits on a human aggressor. A lung shot will not immediately kill a human aggressor with a pistol. So I am of the opinion that every aspect of your shooting can and will be aided by becoming a better fundamental shooter. And there's really no better sport to teach you the fundamentals than bullseye or Olympic style shooting. I think there's a reason why bullseye shooting has almost a cult following by certain portions of the Green Beret community like Pat McNamara and Chuck Pressburg. And there's also a few active Green Beret competitors that I see every time I go up to Camp Perry. And that's especially so as bullseye shooting relates to offensive handgun usage, which in military service, especially in that community, is not just a possibility, but an inevitability. So to say that bullseye shooting has no application to real-world shooting or any other type of shooting is to suggest that the fundamentals of marksmanship are not applicable to other types of shooting or real-life scenarios, and that's simply not true. Guys, I'm telling you, you should try out bullseye shooting. It's a super non-committal sport. You can just show up to the match with your pistol. You don't need a holster. You don't need a belt. You don't need magazine pouches. You don't need any of that stuff. You don't need to run around, get all sweaty, and you're not going to spend 99% of your time at the match watching other people shoot. You're going to actually get to shoot for about 50% of the time. The other 50% of the time you're going to be scoring. Consult the links below for the Bullseye match map in the United States, as well as the CMP competition tracker and the USA Shooting Events page. Thank you all for watching. Thank you especially to my channel members and Patreon supporters for supporting the channel directly. You can support the channel by clicking the relevant links below or hitting the join button next to the subscribe button. Thank you all for watching and have a great day.